meeting on Teams. Just for information, this meeting's being recorded. If you don't want to appear on the video, I suggest that you certainly cover your camera, and certainly for our guests, if you make a noise in the background, you'll suddenly appear on our screen. So you might want to make sure that your A, the microphone's muted, and B, your camera is turned off as well. So I've had apologies from Rob White, who's been called away urgently this morning. There's no other apologies as far as I'm aware. So welcome everybody, and a happy birthday to Sam. I think you've come in on your day off, so thank you very much for that support. And we'll move on to item 2, declarations of interest and gifts and hospitality register. So we have a document that Trudy sent round there. Are there any new declarations of interest? Just to say, so there are 2 options now as far as coming into the meeting. You can either raise your hand. The problem I've found with that is that you have to then remember to put your hand down. So I think it worked quite well last time, putting a little X in the chat box if you want to come into the conversation for members of the governing body, because you have to remember to put your hand down again if you use the raise hand function. And you'll notice this time that we can see more of each other. And Matt's testing that already. So Matt, you've put a cross in the box. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was one thing, Ian, only that it's in the declaration of interest, it suggests I'm employed by Western Health Area Trust. I'm in fact employed by Somerset NHS Foundation Trust, particularly with events over the last week. I would emphasise I'm not employed by Western NHS Trust.
Absolutely. So we'll make that change. Thank you very much, Matt. Chris.
I think it's just to remind members that there is probably an opportunity now as we try and find ways of getting out of COVID. Lots of invitations, lots of applications to join various surveys and groups and sponsored deals. And it's just to think carefully about whether you're involved with that. And if you are, then obviously make sure we get to know about it, because that could come back and bite us if membership of these trials and surveys just is not recorded. So it's really important that we make sure, if in doubt, speak to Trudy or the assurance team for some chapter and verse on what's permissible and what's not.
Absolutely, and certainly you'll notice when you look down that certainly the register of gifts and hospitality, it's just as important to record a gift that you were offered that you refused. So there are some examples of that on the gifts and hospitality register. So I'll take it there are no updates to the conflict of interest register. Thank you. So then we'll move on to item 3, questions from members of the public received in advance of the meeting. I understand, Trudy, that there have been no questions submitted in advance of the meeting?
Yep, no questions this month.
Thank you, and certainly welcome to say members of the public for being part of the meeting, and we'll have an opportunity towards the end for questions related to items on the agenda. So with that, we'll move on to item 4, minutes and action grid of the last meeting. This is where I've got to struggle with my technology and try and see you all and the papers. Here we go. So we've got a Matt, you wanted to come in. You're on mute.
Thanks, Ian. Sorry, still not quite learning the techniques. A quick correction: the minutes again say I'm a GP member, and whilst I accept the honorarium, I'm not.
Apologies for not spotting that when we looked at the action of the minute, so we'll make that. So clinical member, secondary care clinician is your official title, I'm aware. So we just go down any points of accuracy on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Thank you. Then have an appendix, which is the text related to the reply to Nigel Mawson's question at the last governing body meeting, attached for information. Thank you. Thanks, Sam, for putting together those minutes at the last meeting. Move on then to the action grid. Crikey, I really can't see that. I need new glasses. So we have the first one is closed. 160. Just text to full screen. Update to be brought back to the Q&P committee in May. So the item's remaining open. I'm not sure, Nat, whether that was discussed at the policy committee last week.
Certainly, we agreed to put that into part of the recovery plan, so it'll come back to a future date.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on to actions from the meeting from December. So 139, work halted due to COVID-19. That's around the individual risk registers. 138, we're waiting for CLG to resume. And then 134, I understand that is closed. Any other comments on the action grid? Moving swiftly on then, so the chair's update provided for information, really just making reference to say our new ways of working, and really things are, well, they will never be the same again, and it's about how we take what's good and how we can sort of work together with system leadership, but also understanding what's happening at a local level, and reference made in the document to sort of the way that people are working within the primary care networks, and that local leadership, which I found to be incredibly impressive. Other points to note is we're currently out to advert for 2 system chairs for the System Finance and Performance Committee, and also for the Combined Quality Committee. I think interview dates are due to be held later this month, Trudy.
On the 18th.
18th, thank you. I don't know when the closing date is for applications there, but
Thursday.
You'll note that. Okay. Thank you. Any points or questions related to the chair's update? Happy to take any as ever. No, thank you. Should we move on then to item 6, Helen, for the director's update?
Yes, thank you, Ian. And I'm sorry I haven't got my camera on. My line isn't good enough to sustain that at the moment. So set out in front of you are the key issues that we've been dealing with. It's still very COVID related, as you would expect, although we are starting to plan more fully now for the next phases of 1, bringing services back, 2, looking at what has really worked through this period and we would want to sustain, and what has not worked so well and we might want to think about how we change it. And finally, beginning to think about planning for the medium term. So NHS England is preparing to plan for phase 3, which is the period of bringing services back on, but thinking about what we might see in terms of further increased activity, and that's particularly in relation to mental health services. I wasn't planning to say anything else, unless very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Helen. So any questions for Helen related to the director's update? Again, noting that it's particularly COVID heavy in the response. No. Thank you very much. Thanks, Helen, and for all members of the team that have again put together was a useful report. So we can move on to then item 7, the governing body assurance framework. Again, I think is a running theme here around how things are different during COVID. Trudy, did you want to speak to that, to this paper? I think really the thing to note is to say that things have moved on, and thank you.
Yeah, so it's normally a quarterly report, Ian, but because of COVID, we've got staff that have been redeployed and work's been reprioritised and things like that. So we're saying it's not possible to bring a meaningful report to governing body this month. We would like to do some work with directors and committees during the course of the next 2 months in parallel with that recovery phase of COVID. And I think there's also a recognition that we may need a new principal risk around recovery and restoration, but that might replace one of the other principal risks. But we'll, as we kind of come through the next couple of months, we'll kind of start thinking about that and its controls and assurances, and is it right to keep at 9 risks rather than move to 10 principal risks. We've also attached, just for information, all the current corporate red risks, so anything that's 15 and above. But once again, some of those have been updated, some of them haven't. There are some risks that are missing that are being developed, but once again, they relate to the financial position for 2021 and also COVID-related sponsors. So I kind of think this is just a report that, you know, provides a stock take with an acknowledgement that further work is needed.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Trudy. So Judy, you want to come in, and then Chris.
And John Yarnold. John, do you want to go first?
I didn't see John on my list. What's going?
Yeah.
He's put a hand up.
Put a hand up. I said, oh, I couldn't cope with hands and crosses. John, go first then.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Really, just to point out, we're talking about reviewing the risk, because some of the performance risks will have shifted from the Q&P committee into finance and performance. I'm not sure we'll have bottomed out our review to be able to report in full next month. So I think that, you know, we'll give you a progress report on as far as we've got, but it may well take a couple of months before we've had a chance to thoroughly review all of that.
Well, with governing body moving to bi-monthly, the next governing body will be August.
Oh,
so
course,
we've
yeah.
got,
so
we've
we
got
should have
2
got there by
months.
then,
So hopefully we should be able to. I think it's probably also important to remember that with performance moving across to the finance committee, some of those owners of those principal risks have also changed. So Claire will be picking up more of them as well. So just to note.
Thank you. Judy, are you off mute now?
Can I come in then, Ian, if Judy's
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough on Helen's bit. I was pressing my X on this laptop, not the one I'm using as the video. So anyway, I'll get there. I think for me, it's really important that anything that going forward we decide to keep, there's an audit trail that says why, but equally important, there's an audit trail that says why we're stopping doing things. As brief as possible, but really important that we justify why we're stopping doing something. And I know that's going to happen, but just having that audit trail is really important to justify our decision making without just sort of stopping stuff and then just moving forward without any form of explanation. So that's the first bit. And then related to this article, sorry, I'm jumping around, but I think if we can future-proof the risk register as well, in the sense of the more specific we are with our risks, clearly that means that we have to then dedicate time, energy and effort to resolving them. And if we're slightly more strategic and more generic, it could give us more room and flexibility without having to keep revisiting them every time. So it's just a thought, perhaps, if how we look at the risks, we may be able to have a discussion around how we represent them in the future.
So sorry, can I come back on that one then, Chris? So just to provide assurance, we are still doing the red risks per page, so the detailed things, but rather than give everybody, you know, I don't know how many there are on here, you know, 25 pieces of paper, of which some information would be current, some information wouldn't be current. We decided a brief summary was more appropriate at this point in time, but we are definitely continuing with the risk per page, and they will be updated as part of the update of the assurance framework as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you with us, Judy?
That time lucky?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, just a brief point, but I think looking at the way it's ordered, I think COVID is intrinsic to so many of those risk factors, risks, and I think it should probably be number 1 on the list. All of the other things like ambulance response times, UHPs, performance are dependent on what else we're prioritising in the system. So I think we ought to just at the moment put that as number 1.
So can I ask a question then? Because I don't think we have got there is a placeholder for a COVID specific risk, Judy, that kind of encompasses everything, but recognising that actually it touches on everything as well. I don't know whether you want to do it on the call today or whether we take it offline. Is that what would the risk score be, and which committee would it sit in?
It's just that it's on the assurance framework as a risk 20, but it's buried way down in the list. And you've got things like ambulance response time is number one, and it just feels as though that should be the number one, because everything else that we're doing at the moment is really dictated to and governed by what's happening with COVID.
So is the order on there since related to score, isn't it? But then is it the date that things appear on the risk register? I'm just trying to work glance down that. I don't know whether there's any
possibly number related.
Yeah.
On the kind of the left-hand column.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't think there's any precedence given to where in each group of the say the RAG score. I don't think there's any precedence given to where things appear, but absolutely acknowledge that the COVID response and the impact of COVID is our say the subject of almost every conversation at the moment. Picking up on your point, Judy. Thank you. Nikki, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just quickly about the workforce committee, and just really when we might be looking to kind of have an update on when that could restart, or how we start to kind of look at, because we'd already started to integrate with RCHT, just when we might be able to initiate some of those conversations to pick things up as we move forward, really, and just start to understand where we are in terms of our staff, perhaps some of the issues with sickness, what we're seeing in terms of stress, but also thinking as people are starting to balance going back to work with schools and workload and all the other myriad of things that are coming. It'd just be good to get a bit of a handle on that now.
Absolutely. So I made reference in the chair's report around that our constitutional committees are meeting virtually. I know the last workforce committee was stood down, but I wouldn't expect the next one to be stood down, because everything else. So it is really important that we have an understanding of that information, how it's impacting on our organisation, but also how we link across with others. So thank you, Helen.
So picking up on Chris's point and Nikki's point, actually, we're having a piece of work done, as you know, looking at the organisation's response to COVID-19. That falls roughly into two halves. There's a piece looking at the service response, so what has worked well in terms of the changes we've made to service delivery, but there's also a piece that's looking at the workforce and what have the workforce found helpful about the way in which we were operating, what would they like to see changed, and how might we maintain and some of the things that we've done differently that staff are finding helpful and positive. But we're also very conscious that there are some things that staff don't like about the new working arrangements and that they're struggling with. Absolutely, that bit about how do you juggle different bits of your life as we start to see the lockdown lifted in different ways. So we will bring a report to governing body that sets out those issues, and continuing to talk to our staff working group about what will it mean to work differently in the future.
Thank you, Helen. Chris.
It's just to come back on Trudy and Judy's point. Are we not planning to have a GBAF review at the next development session? Because I think it's probably about time we had a good look and a dig around these issues and air any concerns and observations at that point. So am I right, Trudy, in the GB development session, we will be talking about GBAF, is that right?
Yeah, Chris, that I was going to come back to that on the summary, really, of this. That's absolutely fine. That was the comment I was going to come back with, really, so the overall review of the GBAF and how we follow on from COVID. I think it really will take up the bulk or certainly a significant part of the development session in July. Thank you. And in effect, that almost leads on to the next item, really, item 8, which is around the COVID update and the recovery cell. And again, how we are constructing the governance around that to understand how we respond and move into the new normal. So are there any other comments or things that you need related to this item, Trudy?
Not for me, thank you.
Thank you. So I think in summary, we've taken the action there that we'll bring that certainly around ordering of items and how do we emphasise or pick out how the world has changed in response to COVID, picking up on Judy's point and discussion earlier on, and again with Nikki and Helen there around impact on workforce, and so we expect a report to come back to governing body following our next workforce committee. Thank you very much.
Right, excuse me, I put an X and nothing came up.
I can't see an X. Where are
no,
you, Sally?
Well, I put an X. Do I just hit X and what do I have
the
to
chat?
click
It
on?
should be in the chat if you've done that. That's all
okay.
right, but you're
Okay.
here now.
Oh, chat. Oh, the chat. That's what I haven't done. Okay, fine. So sorry about that. Just to come back, Helen says that there's an organisation response, and now you've said that's going to be discussed at the next governing body development session. First of all, can I request that I attend that development session? At the last CAP meeting, the first CAP meeting that we had, I did ask for a stock take from people to do a quick survey of the public, people in their communities' response to what's happened at their surgeries and in their communities. So we've got some feedback on that. And the organisation's response as a whole, how is the organisation going to reach out to members of the public as to their response to what's happened?
Okay, Sally. So we'll take that outside of the meeting as we plan the development session and see how you can link to that, and particularly with your role related to CAP. Okay.
And also Helen's organisation, the whole organisation, how are they going to reach out? Yes. Okay.
Okay. I think I understand the question.
Right.
Happy to move on. Thank you. So. COVID-19 update, Claire. Are you with us?
I am. Yes, I'm still here. Thank you.
I acknowledge, note that you might have to rush off. So if the phone goes, we know why.
Thank you. Yes. So what you have in your governing body papers is a very brief update on our approach to recovery and what the current proposals are. So I wanted to make sure that governing body were cited on and informed on what was happening and had the opportunity to influence and comment how that developed and was shaped. So I've just tried to set out really at a very high level the sort of expected phases of the COVID response and recovery, and these really are very much the national NHS strategy around the 4 phases. So this is not something that we've determined locally. This is very much the sort of national policy mandate. So what we've then done is taken that into our locality and try to think really about how best we coordinate recovery across the system, where that sits best in terms of oversight and operational decisions for recovery, and the terms of reference that are on there sort of describe the current proposals for that. I should stress that these are draft and are currently with our collection of system chief executives for comment and approval, so they may be subject to change, but please do share any thoughts or comments on that. I'm particularly interested, I guess, in the locality flavour and making sure that we capture that as part of recovery and don't lose the sort of very progressive work that's happened in setting up localities and that locality approach, because I think that's something that we really want to make sure that we capture and sustain. And the other thing, I suppose, is how we capture the voice of staff and our population, so not just service users, but those that haven't had contact with the service over the last 10 weeks or so, and what their experiences have been. So I wasn't going to go through the paper in detail. I suppose it's an opportunity to digest and be aware of what's happening, but also to offer any thoughts or comments on things that may be missing or lacking and require development. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful for people.
It does, thank you. And I appreciate it's a paper in draft, but it's a group that's setting itself up. It's a fluid process. And Helen, I think you were first to come in with a point or a comment.
It was in relation to Sally, actually, Ian, because I was a bit slow. I was just wanting to reassure Sally that I'll be joining the CAP and we can pick up her comments separately.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Just two quick asks. Do we question rather than a statement? Do we need lay member from across the system representation on any of these groups, particularly the reference group membership, perhaps, to add that sort of audit stroke, finance stroke, whatever challenge? And the second one is, I think from my learning perspective, a wiring diagram would help to show how this all fits in. And so something like that, as we evolve the structures, I think would show how this then marries in with the existing governance and assurance structures that we have across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Thank you.
I'd agree, Chris, to say it's quite a tight membership for the recovery cell itself, and I think what's important is how that wires or connects to sort of other discussion forum and groups in the system. So I'm thinking of the system-wide board, how we as a CCG can have oversight or sight over what the group are saying and standing up. So quite agree there. Thank you, Judy.
A couple of points. First one is I'd just like some clarification. Page 2 on the timeline, phase 2, it says restatement of clinical services and phased restatement. Does that mean restatement or reinstatement? It doesn't quite make sense. I can understand restatement of critical services as restating what the priorities are, but surely that should be phased reinstatement of knowledge.
Yes, I think you're right there. It's not my diagram, so you're right. I hadn't spotted that there. I would suggest that that's just a typo.
Okay. And then secondly, with the recovery cell, I was just trying to get my head around where the clinical input on that was. I could see you're involved in various parts of this, but is there going to be some quite strong clinical leadership voices in the recovery cell? It looked fairly light from what I could see.
So that's the point I was making there, Judy, about say it's a tight number on the people involved in the recovery cell itself. I think there's all the cells that it's linked to, and the clinical practitioner cabinet being one of those, with that very wide clinical representation from within providers across adult social care, and significant representation from primary care and the LMC. But I think that, as Chris was saying there, that wiring, how is the information flow backwards and forwards, and how is that clinical body able to influence or have oversight over that work, I think is crucial. Thank you.
Okay, I did mean sort of clinical input in the wider sense, including care agencies, etc., which I think is a crucial factor in the ongoing recovery.
Agreed. I think Claire was about to come back in there before I rudely interrupted.
No, that's okay. All I was going to say was I think the sort of general intent around the recovery cell is to very much embed it into the incident response architecture, so that it sort of mirrors what's been happening around response, because they are effectively two sides of the same coin, aren't they? And we aren't really expecting a linear progression. There could be waves of response and then recovery and then back again. So I would very much see the sort of existing cells and sort of how that architecture is currently operating to be mirrored into the recovery cells. So, for example, like the CPC taking the clinical decisions, etc., etc. Does that help? I will bring back a wiring diagram to help make it a bit clearer if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that would help. Judy, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I just really wanted to make that point, that I think we need to make sure there are strong clinical voices at every step of this.
Agreed. I think it really also relates to Chris's point about how do we have lay or sort of wider opinion and influence into that, or understanding of the work. Fran, you're next on my list.
Yeah, thanks. Just it's really echoing everybody else, really, because there's the clinical leadership issue for me. There's the locality issues around, you know, we are doing a lot of work, I know, in ED and around how we're going to see patients and in the COVID situation and keep people safe and the distancing, etc. And there's a lot of money going to be flowing into those kind of arrangements just to, you know, to be able to see business as normal with the, you know, if the tourist system opens up in August. We're going to have a backlog of work coming through from the last few months, and then we're going to have a big lot of people visiting Cornwall potentially, and we are struggling. I mean, a bit of work I'm involved in, just in how do we see patients and keep the distancing, and there's going to be a cost in that. And you know, what I'm seeing in the steering group is it's very top heavy again. It always goes top heavy, and that's probably right. But you've got to get the clinical leadership and the locality leadership embedded in this, otherwise you'll just end up with stuff being done in certain centres and other areas which will struggle, and there will be there's going to be a cost implication in all of this. And how's that getting funded? Are we getting grant from government to help us deal with this, or where's the clinical and the financial governance in all of this? Because I just haven't, you know, I just have a big worry about it.
Thank you, Fran. So perhaps in response to the local sort of the clinical oversight there, or leadership again, I think thanks to Rob and his leadership around the PCN CD network and how he's extending that out, and I say it's not what I was trying to make reference to in the chair's update there is that group is, I think, is rightly forming itself as being that view from the local clinical view. So I think we really watch this space, so that it's about how we morph that and perhaps take it to a new renewed version of the clinical leadership group that we had pre-COVID. As far as the finance question, Fran knows, I don't whether Claire wants to say anything specific, but I think there are many unknowns there. We are keeping a track of COVID-19 related expenditure, and we discussed in the last governing body meeting, certainly around that for the first quarter of this year, what the financial framework was in effect. But Claire, I don't know if you had a specific response back to that specific question from Fran.
Yeah, so whilst we are continuing in a level 4 incident response, the existing sort of command and control governance will continue. So we remain under directions, and sort of decision making about COVID expenditure, etc., is very much under the guidance of NHS England. So what we need to do locally is make sure that we are complying with that and have the right controls in place to make sure that that's what happens. So I don't know if that helps, Fran.
Yeah, that's helpful. You know, I'm just aware that we're going to have to spend a lot of money just being able to see patients and see them safely, particularly as we hit the busiest times of the year, and there will be there's a backlog coming through. So I'm seeing patients that have been, you know, that are coming forward now that should have come forward 6 or 8 weeks ago. So, you know, we've had a nice quiet piece because of COVID in some ways. The COVID's been busy, but the other stuff has been sort of sitting there. So I've just got a worry how we do all that and we keep financial control over what we need to do.
There is a phase 3 light touch planning guidance letter expected on the 8th of June that should set out what the expectations are around phase 3. So phase 3 will cover the period from August to March 21. So when that comes, we'll obviously digest that and bring that back to governing body so that we understand what regime we may be facing for the remainder of the year, and what the expectations are around things like addressing backlogs, etc.
Okay, thank you. Thanks,
yeah,
Claire. Thanks, Fran. Matt.
Briefly, I just agree with everyone talking about some local clinical input, and also I just worry slightly about the national imposition, Claire's described command and control. Page 12 draws a nice graph of a peak and a relaxation. That is not the Southwest experience, I believe. I think what we are seeing certainly north of the patch is actually we have more inpatients with COVID now than we've had at any time. We may come on to this a bit more in part 2, but we just need to be aware that there needs to be some regional recognition that this is not a London-based disease anymore, and that is going to have an impact. It will come in ripples or waves or whatever, but that means recovery, which is being strongly encouraged from the centre, needs to be reflected by different areas responding to what's going on in their local patches. That was my bit.
Quite agree there, Matt, and certainly the expectation is we're already seeing evidence of local outbreaks, and the response will be, first being able to understand what's happening locally, what the need is, and how do we move up and down through the phases. So this won't be a smooth curve, as I think was the point you're making at the end of that the recovery. So I think that was a diagrammatic reference, but I think the thinking has moved on since then. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ian. I think, as Matt says, this isn't going to disappear quickly, is it? It's going to go on for into the medium term. So we need to start thinking about how we evolve this system into our system governance diagram. I think picking up Chris's point about non-executive and lay member oversight, perhaps if we start thinking about those 2 new assurance committees that are being set up as being ones that will look over this, because a big chunk of the work of these groups is about transformation. And I know we've left the development of that layer within the system governance still to be developed. So I think we need to start thinking about the more, rather than the short term, which I understand is command and control from the centre, how are we going to develop this system to be an integral part of our overall governance?
Thank you. Sally, again, you've got your hand up here. I'm looking at the crosses. The hands are not working on my Microsoft Teams, so I'll add you to the end of the list here for people coming in. I think, Helen, you're next.
Yes, I want to pick up some of the points that have been made, actually, because I do want to provide some reassurance. So without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that has got us through the last 8 weeks has been the clinical leadership in designing the model of service delivery that we've put in place, and providing that really important guidance in respect of things like admissions to hospital, supporting people in their care homes, etc., etc. So absolutely, there is no intention that recovery will not be clinically led, and I agree with you, that sort of top-heavy chief executive leadership piece is really about how, once that clinical model is agreed, how do we ensure that organisations enact it, and enact it in a way that is system orientated and not organisation orientated, and in some respects, clearly some of that is still quite immature, and so there is a degree of care needed about how those organisations work together to deliver a shared set of objectives as opposed to individual organisational objectives. So that is in part reflective of what you see here. I think in terms of the money, it is incumbent upon me to say that we had a very clear message from the assurance meeting a couple of weeks ago that there is not a lot of money. Clearly, the NHS has been given the ability to spend money in preparation and in responding to the pandemic. But the message that's coming through very clearly now is that that won't continue. I think the other thing I would reflect with my sort of local authority hat on is that the local authority is getting very similar messages down the local authority line about expectations of local authorities curtailing spend in areas where they had been encouraged to spend in order to respond to the pandemic. So I think we will, as a place, need to recognise that there'll be probably less money to support our recovery than we might have hoped. And then picking up that piece about what does the pandemic look like in the southwest, Matt's point, I think that's a really important one. I think the modelling that we've developed with Exeter and that we're using at the moment very much demonstrates that what we're likely to see here will be different to what has been experienced in the large urban conurbations. And I would be really interested for us to be able to learn from what's happened up further up into the southwest region, because I think that there is a question in my head about whether we are seeing the virus roll down the southwest and down the peninsula at a time when other parts of the country are clearly seeing much less of the virus than we had seen previously. So that sort of agile ability to respond to what we know will be peaks and troughs of infection will be really important for us. And then finally, I would say that John's right, we need to embed this in system governance. And whilst I think we're all committed to that very high level system governance that we've seen talked about with non-exec led boards, there is a lot of work to do now about whether we retain the governance that we signed off just 10 weeks ago, and whether that governance is fit for purpose in light of the changes that we've already made, might wish to keep, and in light of how do we respond agilely to ongoing infection across the southwest.
Absolutely, thank you. So, I mean, I sort of look at the script you reference is very, say, chief executive heavy, but that's for a very good reason. It's about how as a system, do we operationalise what we're asking from those wider system-wide groups. So, thank you. Nat.
Hello, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing to capture the lessons around the response to COVID, and particularly around the services and how people feel about the way that they have been delivered. So that piece of work is going on with the AHSN at the moment, and would include people like Health Watch to help us to talk wider with the general population. It includes care providers such as care homes, and also I just wanted to say, for people who don't normally go to CPC, the AHSN are on the agenda tomorrow to come and talk and capture the clinical views of people around the response and things that would change during those initial first 8 weeks, including things that have been picked up on pitch. So the meeting tomorrow will be focused on those learnings and for the clinical input.
I think it's this afternoon, Nat.
Oh, sorry, it's this afternoon, Ian.
It is, yes. Thank you. So after this meeting. Thank you. Chris. And then Sally.
Having seen Sally's hand go up and down, it was just to remind you that Sally was trying to get on, and so I've sent Sally an email to say where she might try and improve her chances of getting into the meeting. So
I think I can't see that. For information, I can't see any hands whatsoever. So we are back to the old-fashioned crosses in the meeting chat. Yeah. Sally.
So yeah.
Right, well, in the meeting chat, my name comes up with a fun little box by the side of it, not with my initials, and whatever I've done, it doesn't seem to come up. So I've just gone back to waving at you. So sorry about that, everybody.
Okay.
Fine. Okay. Just to pick up on the reference group, etc., and what's just been said by Natalie was very encouraging, that looking at the wider picture, certainly Health Watch, care providers, etc., are we going to reach out to groups within Cornwall, certainly volunteer Cornwall, disability Cornwall. Hearing loss had a very interesting report from Claire Greenwood of Hearing Loss Cornwall about some of the effects that this has had on people who are deaf, and the stress, etc. that's caused. For instance, I didn't know that tinnitus would get worse with stress, and a lot of people have suffered a lot more stress with tinnitus, but various things. So are we actually going to reach out to more of these groups as well via this system?
Can I come back, Ian? Is that okay?
Of course.
Yes, Sally. So I think what we've tried to do is we didn't realise how many surveys had gone out to individual groups already, and we wanted to do a little bit more of a coordinated approach. I think some of our smaller providers have said how they've been inundated with people asking how they are and can they offer support and that sort of thing. So we wanted to make sure that that was done in a coordinated approach to get a better sense of asking the questions once rather than in a random scattergun approach. So I believe that will get done, and it might be part of the longer term engagement rather than the piece of work that is currently going on to inform phase 3 from August. So what we've tried to do is to do an immediate collection of information and then a wider piece of information later on to capture the wider population. Does that make sense?
Can I come back? Yes, can I come back on that?
Of course you can.
Thank you. Great, that's great. How would you do that? And why hasn't the Citizens Advisory Panel been sort of flagged up as perhaps being part of this, or could be part of this?
It absolutely, and I've put your name on the list as we've been speaking.
Right, okay. Right.
So I think what we did originally is we had a group of people to look at a workshop where we could get the majority of people together in a short term. So for instance, this afternoon, we have got quite a few clinicians in the room together rather than doing individual pieces of work, and we started with Healthwatch because we know that they have a lot of the ability to do some of that work. They've already done it, they can coordinate that, so that's where we started. But I do believe, as you say, more people will come online, won't they, as being the people that we need to talk to. But this was our first attempt, so we had a workshop, decided on where we would start, and that's where we are really.
Excellent, fine, thank you.
So really what I'm picking up here, certainly the recovery cell is work in progress, some very specific questions about how that connects to wider system oversight and sort of spreading knowledge and helping decision making. I've got 3 more people that want to come in, but so we'll try and wrap this item up if we can. Paul, Helen and then Nikki. So Paul.
Hi. I'm not sure whether I've understood quite right, but I suppose from primary care, or certainly from a day job perspective, I don't think we've had in the last 2 weeks, as promised, the SOP from the centre to tell us what primary care is expected to do, and we're not hearing anything from the recovery cell. The clinical director group, I'm not sure that they would direct that recovery. They could respond to a SOP and a plan for the recovery, but I'm not sure they would necessarily direct it. So I'm a bit uncertain that as I queue for B&Q and get basically trivial items now, if I wish, we're getting a lot of people coming to our still barred up windows to collect their prescriptions and saying, well, why can't we come in and why can't we have our usual things, because I'm getting that from the supermarkets and from I'll be able to have my hair cut on the 4th of July and everything else. So I'm a bit confused in terms of the central message and also our recovery message and our local clinical response. How do we have a role to try and guide the public as to what is available in a realistic manner, or do we just let the processes roll? I'm a bit lost.
So certainly in response, I mean, primary care has been very sort of fluid and responsive in how it has reset and reorganised itself, and I think that's been in a very safe and appropriate way. I'm just going to take out of order because Andrew popped up there. I assume he's got an answer there, perhaps in specific response to your question about the SOP.
Yeah, so I recognise the challenge you're presenting, Paul. So the bit I can help with, and my team are on, is two things. One is we're under the kind of two areas that Helen and Natty and Claire have talked about in terms of the service response primary care, and then also the workforce response, which I might describe as the CCG primary care directorate team and all its wider networks of LMC clinical directors and those sorts of things. We're pulling together the kind of the draft framework as to how that sort of recovery planning and then responding again, and then recovering and responding, which might be, as you say, as Matt mentioned earlier on, might be an ongoing process. We're trying to pull together a draft. So in terms of that kind of coordinating bit for general practice primary care, my team and wider colleagues will attempt to do that first draft, and then we'll engage with others to sort of help shape that. We haven't got a head round the SOP, which, you know, we had SOP version 1 fairly months ago. We've been promised version 2 for quite some time, and suddenly I've got version 3, which arrived over the weekend without a lot of fanfare. So we're just going through the 18 odd pages of it to try and work out what that means operationally and what it doesn't mean operationally. So yeah, point taken. Can provide some help in coordinating other stuff. There's still homework to do on trying to understand that SOP and many other changes that are still coming through.
Thank you, Andrew. Helen.
Just very briefly to say, I'll be meeting with the voluntary sector tomorrow, and we will be looking at how they feed into and support this process too.
Thanks again. That's in response to Sally's comment earlier on then. Thank you very much. Nikki, final point on this item?
Yeah, it's something we started to explore before COVID-19, and that was how we actually do wider engagement, because what we tend to do as a system is to always go to the same people that always engage with engagement. And what that I think we then do is actually still be disconnected to the kinds of groups of people that would not normally kind of engage with the groups and the forums that we set up. So I wonder how we get better and look at engaging with those wider conversations which are happening all the time at the moment. So, for example, we've got Eden Project's Big Lunch happening in a few days' time, which is a whole load of different voices that I've never seen involved before, taking part in online forums where we could actually embed questions and look at how we could do things differently. There's also just been a week-long kindness appreciative inquiry. Again, I was a wide range of different voices on there that I've never seen before. Different perspectives that we don't normally capture, and I wonder why we're not embedding questions and getting engaged with these kinds of things that are happening. And I'm also concerned that where are we actually directly engaging with young people when we've seen that under 25s are likely to be massively impacted. So some amazing things that I've seen taken part in on Instagram. You versus You is an organisation of young people, run by young people, that are talking directly to them and using role models, but asking questions on a channel where they communicate on a day-to-day basis. And also, just to pick up finally Sally's point, the feedback from the deaf community has actually been quite alarming in what they've said and how they've been able to interpret and understand information, to take part in online debates, what happens when they're wearing face masks and then therefore can't lip read, and also really how we're really thinking about accessible comms going forward. So whilst I know focus groups and all these things are important, I worry that we always do the same thing, so we always get the same feedback, and it would be nice to see how we go a little bit more innovative with that.
Thank you, Nikki. So absolutely so. I think a comment was made earlier on around sometimes the survey fatigue, or you were asked by so many people, where does it all go, and is there some coordination around that? At one point I didn't emphasise in the chair's update is we are out to advert, or about to go out to advert, for a system-wide comms lead, the Director of Communication. The whole intention of that is around absolutely how do we knit together what the conversation across wider communities. How do we understand inequalities in individual localities, and how do we pick up intelligence and use that for the better. So I would say watch this space. Thank you. So a good level of debate there and discussion. I think really what as an item, I think really the point here is that the recovery cell is one part of that. I think the point from this is that's the very senior executive leadership, but the point that's come out well and loud and clear throughout the debate is around how does that connect wherever it can, because this is the I think an important point of contact around how do we operationalise and how do we effect change for what we can all see, feel, and in our daily lives. Thank you. Then move on to item 9. We're got a little bit behind there. I apologise for that, but we've got some updates from the Finance and Performance Committee Chairs reports. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ian. There's just a note there of what of the meeting that we held on the 26th of May, again on MS Teams. I think the minutes of the 28th of April should be with the pack, but I think they've been missed out, so we'll have to circulate those separately. There's just 3 things I'd like to sort of pick out for a little bit more explanation. First of all, the financial update. You'll recall last month that we suggested, or we put forward an interim budget based upon our best understanding of what the centre was telling us was going to happen. Since then, everything's changed. The system now is basically the NHSEI will predicted what they think we'll spend based upon last year's outturn. We then have to submit what we've actually spent and account for the differences, either the differences of things that were omitted from their forecast that are non-COVID-19 related, and then set out the additional expenditure on COVID-19, and then they will give us the cash limit to match that. So in effect, covering the first quarter plus July, as I understand it, all CCGs, provided that those extras are within reasonable parameters, would be showing a break-even position. As yet, we don't know what's going to happen beyond August and beyond when we enter phase 3. I mean, looking at the comparative figures that Claire shared with me, I don't think we particularly outline on anything, so that should be fine. We're moving towards integrated performance reporting, so the future will be combining finance, performance and quality in one report. The business intelligence teams within each organisation have been working in partnership, and they populated a database with basically everything from all the providers and the CCG in there. So if you can think of it as a big data cube, everything's in there, and you can slice and dice that to suit the needs of particular committees and particular reports. Clearly, this is sort of, we don't expect the reports in at the end of month 2 going to our June committee meeting to be the polished article. We're going to have to spend a fair bit of time, I think, in the next committee working with Sarah Foster, who's the RBI lead, to ensure that that's sort of fulfilling our requirements. Hopefully we'll get there, but it will be, I think, a bit of a journey over the next few months to get that up to what I would think will be the final article. And then finally, on future agenda planning, I think what we're trying to do is to streamline the meetings so we spend less time. We're currently taking over performance in this year, but the aim of the committee, I think, is to try and get that and do the extra work, but do it within the same time scale, or as we were doing just finance before. And we're doing that by structuring the agenda so that we don't spend any time on information items. We deal with those outside the meeting if there's any queries or whatever. We make sure that we only get those papers brought to us that require a decision or approval for recommendation to the governing body that really require the finance committee's sort of imprimatur, and everything else dealt with at an executive level. And then we will obviously look at performance, but I think we'll spend a bit of time on that over the next few months, but hopefully we can cut that down so we're focusing on the significant outliers. And then there will, from time to time, be a sort of strategy and planning part of the agenda. I think that's probably all I need to say. Happy if Francis, John or Claire want to add anything if they feel I've missed out any highlights. But other than that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. And again, really acknowledging that so the meeting last week was the part of that transition. So finance having some oversight now over performance, and then bringing together members of the quality committee and the finance and performance committee over sort of the join up over lunch there, so that where there are common items we can be efficient, but also share our thinking.
Yeah.
So no further comments related to that. I don't think there's anything that we're not asked to make a decision there, but you say you provided information there and updates related to the meeting last week. Claire, are you happy to pick up then on the finance performance report itself?
Yes, of course, Ian. So this is the month 12 performance report, which might feel slightly out of sync given we're now at 2nd of June, but of course it's our year-end position, so it takes a little while to finalise that position. So this really is closing off what is our expected month 12 position. I saw Steve Johnson join the meeting, so this is an unaudited position, and we'll be hearing from our auditors later on in the governing body meeting. So yeah, I don't think there's anything in there that the governing body haven't been cited on. It really is just formally closing off the month 12 position, so happy to take any queries if there are any.
Thank you. I'll give a little second or two for a cross in the box or a wave in the camera. Thank you. Then item 11, the performance reporting for month, sorry, item 12, Quality Committee Chairs update. Paul, are you able to speak to that?
Sorry, Ian, I think you've jumped an item.
So 11, the performance reporting for month 12 March. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so this is the non-financial performance report. So this contains all the information and data relating to our constitutional standards and other performance data. So again, this should be familiar to the governing body, and is just really formally reporting the month 12 position. The data is 2 months in arrears, so it's quite normal for it to be looking back this far. Happy to again take any questions or queries, which I'll do my best to answer, but may need to rely on other director colleagues for detail.
Thank you, Chris.
I just wonder, as part of our summary, whether we need some form of COVID-19 specific reference. I don't know how that could be manifested. It could manifest itself in so many ways, but for me, it's, and as goes back to what Judy said, it's going to impact heavily. It has impacted heavily and will continue to impact heavily as we go forward. So I just wonder if we need to have some form of formal reference to C19 in our summary chart there.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible proposal, Chris, and it's certainly something that we've talked about. I think John alluded to the sort of development of integrated reporting as we move forward. So hopefully our performance reporting will start to look quite a bit different, but trying to keep the best of what we've got, but make it maybe a bit more penetrable, so that we can hone in on the things that we need to be focusing on. And obviously, like you say, given where we are, COVID will becoming an increasing feature on that, not only in direct COVID response and the activity related to that, but also the indirect impact of COVID on things like routine backlogs and other consequences, perhaps on mental health, etc., etc. So this obviously, because it's month 12, is looking at the snapshot of March, when really COVID started to impact. So we will increasingly see a COVID flavour in here, I would think.
And you can certainly notice that on some of the charts, really, where there is almost a step change in some performance issues, again, which absolutely reflects COVID. So we'll see that going forward, but also how do we respond to that? Thank you. Anything else then on item 11? Sorry for my jumping an item. Okay. So then item 12, the Quality Committee Chair's report, update from May, and then the minutes from January. That seems an age ago.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I wasn't at the January one. Rob did that one, but he's not here. But so if there's anything, if Natalie can pick that up, as with most of these things. So we've looked at the assurance framework in some detail to just check in terms of how we're getting quality assurance and looking at the structures that we've got there. We've had a thorough update from safeguarding and how that's been continuing, and patient safety, still trying to get pitch to be a little bit more dynamic. As an interim, Lisa Nightingale asked if a GP could be involved to get primary care voice into patient safety learning group. So I've offered to do that, but we did wonder if we would maybe share that around governing body GPs and wider, but just as a sort of immediate needing to step in, I'm happy to give that a go. So yeah, any questions?
Thank you. I'm particularly picking up on that last point. So if you can perhaps have a discussion outside of the meeting around if you say some support's needed there for clinical or GP input. Thank you. Item 13 then, the quality report itself.
Lovely, thank you, Ian. It's just a short report that provides a little bit more detail to the discussion that we had last week at the committee. It's fair to say that we haven't stood down any of the quality assurance role that we have as a CCG through COVID, and we have internally, although we stood down the committee, we've not stood down the workings internally, so are able to provide assurances to the governing body. There isn't really anything in addition to that paper that I wanted to raise today, but I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Judy.
How's that? Unmuted.
You're unmuted. I can hear you.
Thank you. I just wanted to check, have we got a handle on where we're at with cancer 2-week wait referral times, percentages, and the diagnostic 6-week wait targets? I mean, obviously, it's everything's been in turmoil at the moment, but I was really wondering what the recovery trajectory is for those.
My apologies, Judy. These are now discussed in the performance report that goes to finance, and I wasn't part of that meeting, so I'm going to have to defer to other colleagues to answer that question for you.
John, are you able to respond to that on what last week, or Paul, were you on that meet?
I mean, it's not clear. We just got the one chart that's in your papers, Ian. So it very much we haven't dug down into it yet. I think until we start getting the system that Sarah Foster demonstrated, we'll be able to sort of drill down into things in the meeting. So I don't have any sort of insight into that other than the figures that are before you.
But actually, that was the point I was making. They almost like drop off a cliff, really, certainly around the diagnostic, which is what you picked up on there, Judy. Yeah. So,
it just seems that I mean, we've had the discussion. I mean, I totally wholly agree with Helen's comments earlier about this seeming to be rolling southwest at a time when everything's opening up, and we're likely to be seeing, I think a lot of the hotels are planning on opening up to visitors in July, all being well. And we've seen what's happened at Western Hospital recently, having to close its doors because of COVID. It just seems that we have a window where there's an opportunity now to start catching up with some of these cancer referrals. and all of the people who will no doubt contribute to excess deaths in the future related to COVID, even a year or two from now. I just wonder what the system's doing in terms of trying to use this window, because we may well be looking at a second wave coming fairly quickly.
So the approach has been speciality by speciality, Judy, around what can be turned on when it's safe and okay to do so, and that's being led by say each of the clinical directors within our acute providers on a needs-based and a priority-based approach.
And do we have any feedback on how much activity is going on for urgent cancer referrals at the moment?
So that's your point around really having some oversight over those figures, and can that be broken down by speciality or condition? So again, I absolutely, that's the sort of thing that the performance committee ought to be getting information on.
Yeah, I do feel as a governing body that it's a priority for us to be kept informed of how that's being switched on and what the impact of and treating those patients has been.
Agreed. So we'll take that back as a point and wanting for the performance committee for what the information they're receiving related to that, so they can understand not only as an overall figure, but I would suggest by area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
2 quick points. It relates to what Judy and Helen have just been saying. I think for me, we are going to see a spike. And I think how we message that, because people are now, certainly up here in Oxfordshire, it's almost as if C19 never existed. We're back to normal and people are social distancing is just not happening. So I think with that sort of happening, I assume it's happening in the southwest and particularly in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we're going to have a messaging issue if we then have to ramp back up again. And I just wonder if we've got an active message campaign going out there that's saying, look, we're not out of the woods yet. We do need to be careful, keep distance, be alert, and all the other good messages that we know we need to send out. Because if we do get a second spike, it could be quite serious. So that's the first bit. The second bit is the top of page 5 of the report. It talks about CPFT and duty of candour. And my concern is that why is there a non-assurance or a less assurance of patient family involvement in the incident process? Because it seems that's quite a striking line for me. I just wonder, what are we doing about it? Why is it happening? And what are we doing about to get that duty of candour that we know we need? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Nat, are you able to come back?
Yes, of course I can. So I think what we've had in CFT and RCHT are 2 different approaches to duty of candour, and now we have one chief nurse for both of those organisations. So that's how it's come to light, because the merging of 2 different systems and processes really to get the best of both. So that's where we are at the moment, and one of our members of staff is currently working in CFT 2 days a week to help them with their governance. So this is all work in progress to make sure that the families are informed at the beginning and throughout the process rather than at the end. So it is just around 2 different processes, I think, and what we've previously been capturing.
Thank you. John.
Hi, just a point, and it says at the beginning that Appendix 1, the latest performance dashboard, is it because normally we get, I mean, the only dashboard we've got is on the performance report, but that's at CCG level. We normally get a sort of more detailed view provider by provider. And then I'm assuming, Natalie, that anything that you're just highlighting the points, so there are no other quality issues, say, on CPFT, other than the reference to falls and the duty of candour. Is that the right assumption?
That's from a quality.
Everything else is fine.
That's from a quality perspective, looking at quality metrics. So what we've discussed before, haven't we, is where performance issues are not performing to the level at which we would want them to perform. I imagine that the performance committee will ask the quality committee to look in more depth at some areas.
Yeah, I think we are getting somebody from the quality assurance group into the finance and performance committee, so we'll have that. And also we'll have access live during the meeting to the database, so we can start to drill down.
Like we used to do in the Quality Committee. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, John, and thanks, Nat. Melissa.
Hiya. Yeah, sorry, I think Nat answered my point. It was based on the duty of candour process. As you know, I've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. And from having experienced it, duty of candour can be as simple as someone going in and speaking to a member of family, and that will be the end of it. Actually putting 2 and 2 together is a completely different thing. And families at the moment of a bereavement simply just don't have the information to hand about what is accessible to them, what's available to them, what the process is, and there's no one there to really explain that. I know that the NHS, I was part of a wider piece that gave information and policy and guidance to acute trusts, but that didn't really cover community-based deaths or deaths in care homes and things like that. So I know that there is stuff out there, but I mean, I'm mix in those sort of circles, and I know it's still not happening in reality. For want of the best will in the world and everyone with the best intentions, we come down to this: if there has been any kind of wrongdoing in a situation, people just clam up and they don't speak for fear of retribution or fear of something happening to them. So it creates that barrier to transparency and openness. But I'm happy to be involved or get in help in any way I can. But I know that there's lots of guidance out there. It's just knowing where it is and how to access it and how to put it into a format that can be accessible for families in a moment of grief and total loss, really.
Lovely, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. And again, looking forward and looking at the appointment of a lay or non-exec member as the system quality chair, I'd very much see. So our own quality committee has been again talking about this sort of thing for a long time, but now we in theory we have that oversight right across the system, and absolutely want to see that sort of conversation and honesty coming through there. Thank you. So anything else then on the quality report? Thanks, Nat, for that summary and exception report.
No, thank you from me.
Thank you. So then can I welcome Tim Francis for the mental health strategy. It seemed a year ago that we were sat at the Headland, I think, with Paul Palmer. I've got an echo, the launch of a Together in Mind strategy.
That's right. Thank you, Ian. Yes, that's right. We had the launch of a draft strategy, I think in May of last year, where Chief Exec Paul Farmer came down. He's given his endorsement. You'll see his words in the forward. So this represents the final word edit and the document's progression to full ratification of the joint mental health strategy for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly for adults. It's passed through scrutiny within the council, and the document's on its journey to the Health and Wellbeing Board. So I'm looking really for governing body to endorse and support its onward progression. The document itself has stemmed primarily from the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. So there's been a collaborative approach from the outset, really, with public health. We've been very thorough in our work and endeavour to identify the determinants of poor mental ill health. We have embarked from day one on fully representative engagement and involvement from across the sector, across the community, with a range of stakeholder and partner groups joining us on the journey to co-produce the document that you see in front of you now. I think the engagement report is actually attached, so members could have a look through that. I'm happy to take questions around that too. We've remained consistent with the synergy to the One Vision strategy, as well as the health and wellbeing strategy, to ensure representative join up across the system. And there's a read through, you'll see, certainly in terms of prevention and, as I said, addressing the wider determinants of poor health. There are reflective objectives of the system plan as well, in terms of the mental health long-term plan must-dos, but also a very clear acknowledgement of the gaps and the needs which local people have identified and exhibit, so that we can do the very best that we can to meet the needs of local people across our varied communities. We have included an enhanced areas around adult social care to incorporate reference to ADAS, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Care, to ensure that we give detail around what we would want to do to the social care element of the provision that we see, which is extremely useful. We've also re-emphasised the trauma-informed element to the strategy, and also the area around the transitions for younger adults, and further and higher education, and the support for groups of young people who come to the area and who often find themselves a little isolated and less locked in to service provision. It's been very much, as I say, designed by the people. Healthwatch have helped us along the way, which is fantastic. So I'd like to say thank you to Amanda and her team, that they've been really supportive of this process. They carried out on our behalf appreciative inquiry using the recognised methodology from the US, which I think has brought real value, not least in supporting our providers to recognise the great work they're already doing, but also to explore and understand with them how they might want to broaden their offer and work more collectively across the system. So again, that report has been summarised in the attached document, which I think is a fantastic piece of work. They've done a great job there to inform the strategy. The strategy is very whole person. It does talk to the needs of people with comorbid dual presentations, be that autism and learning disability and mental health, or be that physical and mental health conditions, much of which is described quite eloquently in the long-term plan. But again, we've re-emphasised what that means for people here across our pathways, and how we might want to expand the services such as IAP services, improving access to psychological therapies. Clearly, we want to ensure that we have the right skill in the right place to meet the needs of people in their local communities. We've heavily emphasised that throughout the document, and also putting people at front and centre of what we're doing from the word go. Some of the things that we've already seen are good traction when it comes to the delivery of expansion across transformation lines like crisis and acute services already. We're seeing expansion to IAP services already. So the implementation is underway. The governance and oversight of the onward journey will sit within the newly formed Mental Health Board, which sadly as a result of COVID was stood down, but we have re-established a meeting for a couple of weeks' time to do a little stock take. We're in the process of developing an implementation plan, much of which we've developed throughout this period of COVID, interestingly. So the bringing forward of some of these intentions has led to things like the 24/7 telephone helpline, and a number of other adaptations to the way that the crisis services are operating at the moment, and which I think is more noticeable in terms of a strategy, how CFT are working alongside third and voluntary sector to deliver wraparound support to people who are deemed as low risk across the community. So we're already seeing some of the strategic intentions borne out in operational change, which is really brilliant. It's very positive news. I think that the infographics which have been included in the strategy help. I think it's recognisable to people. The feedback's been very positive. We have incorporated and responded to every single piece of feedback that we've received, and we've got a comprehensive log and an audit trail of that too. And the strategy simply now needs a last tweak in terms of the design, and then it's ready for full circulation. So the intention there is to take the document next to the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I'd invite questions, really. I think that what we have seen over the last 10 weeks is a concerted effort to maintain the direction of travel when it comes to the delivery of the mental health strategy. And that includes elements of social care. We've progressed work around the revised Section 75 agreement, which is more than just a Section 75 agreement. It's about the delivery of future-proofed adult social care, also the work of the voluntary sector as well, and seeing really that materialise in front of our eyes, which is great. As I said, IAPT expanding, single point of access being brought forward, and the concept of no wrong door, trusted assessments, and 24/7 support. We will be bringing in line and enhancing social prescribing and peer support to help people on their journey in and out of services. So again, inclusive and working alongside people across their communities, and providers working together in support of the primary care networks, general practice, and the wider primary care offer. So I think that's where we're at with the strategy. So I'm really looking for the governing body members really to put some questions to me. Many of you will have spoken to me before about the strategy and supported the development, and I thank you all for that. It's been quite a long and protracted journey, but for very valid reasons, we've extended the engagement. We extended that by several months, and I think that's great. The timelines for ratification are going to take some time, but we're nearly there. So I'll open that one up, Ian, if I can. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks for, again, all the efforts over, again, I think quite rightly over a prolonged period of time. I say on a number of questions that are coming in here. So, Rachel.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank Tim and his team for the work that we've been doing, and I think this is a really excellent strategy. It's been through a number of iterations, and as you said, Public Health have worked really closely with Tim, and to provide sort of evidence space, and also I think to move it a little bit more into the prevention and include the wellbeing element, recognising it isn't just about treatment, but also about, you know, providing the support before people have problems. So I think I really welcome that approach, and the engagement and responsiveness that I think has been done as part of that work to listen and to take different approaches, and also recognising the really quick advancement, as Tim has said, of a number of initiatives over the last 10 weeks that have been accelerated. So recognising that, and just you know, thank Tim for all the work that has been done on this, and really give it full support.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, and I think that the important next steps are how do we socialise this and start to say, I'm pleased to hear that the Mental Health Board will have oversight over the implementation of the strategy. But how do we have that wider communication and make this real and useful? Thank you, John. Got John Yarnell, but then John Garman. Sorry. You're on mute, John.
So old man trouble with new technology. Yeah, no, this has been really exemplary, Tim, in the way it's been developed, and the involvement I think that you've done, and the final product is, you know, I think we can all support. I don't know whether it's too late to suggest any sort of refinement to this, but I did find I got a little bit lost reading through it, and actually it wasn't until there's a figure 7 which sets out, I think, the different schemes, and then some narrative along the side of it, and I began to sort of understand the, if you like, the topography of what the strategy is all about. So I just wonder whether there's some merit in putting that towards the front with a little bit of summary, so that lay people like myself can get, you know, can understand quickly where it's going. I think the other bit, the final bit, is then, you know, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to measure progress going forward? Yeah, because some of it lacks quantification. So I think not necessarily part of the strategy, but develop it. How do we know when these things have been delivered and been delivered to the level of quality and volume that you would expect?
Absolutely. So thank you for that. That's a valid point. So interestingly, the document I have in front of me has a significant amount more design work on it. So, for example, we now have infographics to make it very, you've got to see that. So very easy to see, and it's visual from the outset. So apologies. I think you simply do have the final word edit. So I'll make sure that's circulated to you. That will probably have been a mistake on our part. So I'll make sure that that's circulated to you before the end of the day. There are pages here which are relatively easy read as well, and we've already done a summary infographic plan on a page, but it does take you on a very clear journey. So I'd welcome feedback. I'll circulate that, John, and I'll take feedback directly to myself, if that's okay to email. Second point, the setting of milestones to assure the implementation of the things that are vital for us and our communities has started already. So we had already established a mobilisation group, which was in terms of the LTP must-dos, the NHS England must-dos. We've got those in train, and we know where we are with implementation, and we're on track with our implementation. That will feed into the Mental Health Board. What I'm doing now is working with Richard Sharp, one of Rachel's team, to understand how we better quantify and measure the impacts around prevention, which is sometimes more difficult actually to quantify. What we're also going to be doing, and this is relatively hot off the press, is building in the work that we commenced 3 weeks ago around surge and meeting likely demand as a result of COVID-19 on people's mental health and well-being, which is likely to impact for some significant time, probably into the autumn, if not the winter. So again, we're going to be factoring that in to see whether or not the impacts of bringing services forward is offering some positive outcomes. So we're there, but it's behind the scene and it has yet to be fully developed, I think it's fair to say at this stage, but I'm confident that we're there. I mean, normally we'd look to do the implementation plan afterwards. We'd already started it. It's just not fully formed. This is what I'd say. It's sitting in 2 different places. Yeah.
And so I think the point you were making there, said many things have been stood up really during the development of this strategy. So we haven't waited for the strategy to be to lead and implement change. It's an ongoing iterative process that will continue. And I think what we've heard there is that oversight around John's question around the objectivity and how do we measure success. We'll look to the Mental Health Board for leadership related to that and for feedback on how we're doing.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think I might welcome, if I can just say, what I would welcome is potential peer review in the future. I think if we're really going to critique our effort and with hand on heart say we've delivered, we need to invite external evaluation. So that's what I'll be plumping for, and I think I'll take that via the board.
Thank you. Thanks. John Garman.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Tim. I'd really reiterate this is very impressive as a document. So my point I was going to bring up was around the idea of fragmentation, which does get mentioned a few times in the paper. And I guess thinking about it from a patient's perspective, actually what they often really get frustrated by with mental health services at the moment is the idea that actually one team can discharge you and you don't really have anywhere else to go in terms of other support. There isn't often that kind of that integration between services, whether that be the statutory services or third sector or whatever it might be. Actually, the support needs to be seamless rather than sort of actually separate teams that can discharge and kind of push between each other. So I was just sort of thinking actually that idea of fragmentation needs to be right up at the or the loss of fragmentation needs to be right up at the centre of kind of everything that happens, just thinking about it from a patient's perspective.
John, absolutely. And one piece of engagement that stands out is when I went to Truro College and I sat in front of about 15 students who were fantastically upfront with me about their views, and over half of them would say that they felt that there was a fragmentation in the support that they received when they moved to our county. Now that's sad. That's just a sad thing. The sharing of information, people just reluctant and lacking an understanding around data protection and what is safe to share. So again, yes, we will be looking at that. We've seen some local evidence of how people are wrapping around individuals. So Pentreath, for example, are now working effectively with community mental health teams and CFT to share clinical record information. So there is a continuity and a seamlessness to that. I think that some solutions lie in the use of IT. So looking at how people access clinical record. And one area that we're wanting to look at in more detail is how, for people with very complex needs, dual diagnosis, drug and alcohol services are openly sharing information with mental health services, because that group of people are often very vulnerable and sometimes the information doesn't follow the person. So we're going to be looking at that as well, but very valid point, yes.
Okay,
certainly welcome. Yeah, anything we can do to address fragmentation and so sharing of information in the best interest of people, I think absolutely. Thank you. Judy.
Yes, thanks, Tim. I thought that was a really coherent and informative report, very aspirational, but also very concrete on the hows. I was really interested to see some of the strategies you've got in place for targeting men, young men, suicide risk, and also that dementia was in there. So it particularly useful and relevant. Just to pick up on the issue about fragmentation, you talk about, in the report, you talk about supporting hospital inpatients with mental health problems. Given the structure of our hospital system, given the use of community hospitals, that the fact that we often will have a patient who's suicidal admitted with that as a primary mental health issue, but then they might go on to a prolonged period of care in a non-psychiatric setting. There's quite a lot of stigmatization that still goes on in the care of those patients, and sometimes I've certainly experienced that, where they're then, perhaps with older people, having to go on into a care setting and held as a stigma that prevents people from going into particular care homes where mental health might not be their primary need. I just wondered whether this strategy would encompass those kind of people who fall through the cracks in service provision.
Take it off me. Thank you, Judy. Yes, there's a thread running through the strategy, which is an intention to make mental health everybody's business. If it's not, then we are going to fail. We have seen the conversations are changing across the county. I've noticed that. So people are understanding the difference now between mental well-being and mental health and mental illness. That's coming, and that's really healthy. Having the right people in the right place at the right time, yes, will absolutely meet the needs. But if we're going to do this properly, we need to be ramping up understanding to destigmatise people's awareness. So that might be around mental health first aid. It might be about psychological first aid. It might be, I think, about influencing workforce committees to start to ask them some very direct questions around whether they have confidence that their workforce understand what a mental health condition or mental health need or what someone looks like when they're experiencing anxiety and trauma, and where they might go for support. So yes, how we do that will involve some more conversation. I think that's a much broader piece of work. Working with Rachel's team at Public Health, they have got an interesting approach to some of this, and I would want to work with them on that. This is more than just the health response. So prevention is about people understanding, people knowing, and people feeling accepted, I think. We're doing some interesting work now in terms of, if we take IAPT, for example, and the expansion of IAPT services for people with mild to moderate depression, anxiety and self-esteem, a lot of that is now starting to be co-located, so why wouldn't we try and co-locate that in other places, less traditional places, for example? Now that's something that the board could consider, and the system will need to consider, as opposed to just putting it on health pathways. Why wouldn't we start to embed that skill, knowledge and experience elsewhere? If we're developing multidisciplinary, multifunctional networks, which we are, mental health should be an intrinsic part of that work, and I think that will then filter out. Working with Health Watch, working with the voluntary sector is going to be pivotal to what we're doing. We're seeing that pay dividends now, where otherwise they would have seen health sitting over here and adult social care sitting here. They're not now. We're working together. So I believe, I hope there will be a spread of understanding and acceptance that this document is really, really important to our communities. I think we're seeing it already. There will be groups, and I rely on you as colleagues and people across primary care in terms of GPs to flag with me and my team and others, where are the gaps appearing? Is there something emerging that we need to respond to? Because I think we've got the flex. We're working together now integratively to meet some of those. So some of the groups that you just mentioned, yeah, that's right. In some areas, they make quite good responses.
Nikki, Kelly and I both sit on the Workforce Committee. Nikki's the chair, so perhaps we could pick up on that with you at a later point.
It'd be fantastic. Thank you. And the work we've been doing with the council now, and I've been encouraging my team to work side by side with the council local authority now, is starting to have conversations around the workforce out here, so the economy, how we're supporting the economy in terms of well-being and the output in terms of socioeconomic outputs, the workforce of large employers like the NHS, for example, like the council, for example. How are we ensuring that they're doing all they can, which in most cases they are, to support well-being? So I'd welcome that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Fran.
Yeah, it's great read, and delighted about the fragmentation. But one of the issues I've got the IT stuff. I've been struggling a little bit with prescriptions flowing from CPFT to the community where the drugs are unlicensed. And I wondered, was there a plan to get e-prescribing in here? Because that would, you know, where people can consultants can e-prescribe to chemists or pharmacists, would be really helpful, because at the moment we're pushing bits of paper around the community still. So, you know, most of the rest of us have moved on in the way we prescribe, but the organisation seems to be a little bit behind the curve on that one.
So that's a specific operation of that question. Yeah, Tim, have you got it's not really related to the strategy.
Anything that makes it easier for us to meet the needs of the people who we serve, then why wouldn't we consider it? So as a conversation and a topic to pick up and think about at the board, yes, why wouldn't we look at this in the round? I've met with, interestingly, the interim director, medical director, Adrian Flynn from CFT, and he's driven by the use of innovation and particularly IT. He's enthused by that. And I think that you're pushing an open door in terms of commitment, enthusiasm. How we translate that into change is the bit we're going to have to operationalise. And most of my CFT colleagues will say to me, be careful what you write in the strategy, we do need to operationalise it. So, but yes, why wouldn't we try and make things easier? How we do it, it might take some time, but I've noted it. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Fran, for the point. Nikki.
Oh, thanks, Tim. It's great strategy. Just you answered one of my questions already, which was really looking at how we adapt to a post-COVID-19, but also maybe one where we're fluctuating in and out for people with experiencing mental health issues, but also just really trying to think about what might be the new situations that we might see that would impact on the strategy. So people are starting to talk about almost this collective PTSD that might be there within communities, particularly for those people that have been shielding and starting to look at coming out of isolation and all of a sudden identifying as vulnerable, where perhaps they haven't been seen as vulnerable by themselves or others before. Obviously, in terms of the voluntary sector, and Helen has already talked about the survey that's going out to the voluntary sector to understand which services are going to be impacted and may not be there anymore from a voluntary sector perspective. So I'm interested in how the strategy is going to link with the evolving picture from the grassroots services that you're obviously going to be relying on a lot at that front end to deliver. And then if there's also challenges with funding, which Helen has also highlighted, how is the strategy going to adapt to those kinds of funding shortages that might be there as we go forward? I'm also interested just in terms of Mental Capacity and Mental Health Act, and during COVID and post-COVID, and as I said, as we fluctuate, how are people going to be supported effectively with decision making and best interest decision making, and how are we all going to have oversight of that? And just one final point I wanted to raise, it's kind of come up to us as we've done a stock take with CAP, and that's particularly around non-verbal communication. So the deaf community have highlighted issues in terms of getting consultations. They've so 2 recent occasions with attempted suicides, and these vulnerable patients were told by staff at Trellis that they should seek psychological help from Valued Lives. Valued Lives said that they knew nothing about deafness and would not pay interpreter fees. There was a consultation with NHS England, who was advised that BSL could be charged for. However, there seems to be no way that deaf people can gain the support that they need. And it seems the service has changed to talking therapy without full counselling being offered. So there's that, and I'll send you something else, which is quite a detailed account of a recent hospital experience of a profoundly deaf person and the impact of that on the mental health and well-being of the family. So I'm also interested in how do we, a strategy's great, and you know, and as you've talked about how we're all working collectively together, but how that's translating on the ground, and as we move in and out of crisis points, how we adapt the strategy and how we ensure that we communicate with those more vulnerable groups, I think is going to be key. So I'm interested in how we keep a monitoring eye on all of those things, really.
Okay, so thank you, Nikki. So in reverse order, if I can, so throughout the COVID period, we have established and maintained a multi-agency operational group to continue the work of the strategy, maintain business as usual, and the work that we haven't been asked to step down by NHS England. That also links across to 3 other mobilisation groups which sit under the Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Cell, which offers governance, scrutiny and a very clear steer around what we think we should be doing to keep people safe in our communities. So I'd like to assure you that there is governance and audit wrapped around all of that, and we are seeing some tangible evidence that things are working and that they are responding on the shop floor, as it were, to the things that we are considering and on some occasions are concerned about. And that reports up to the incident management structure within local authority at the moment, and also I report via our SLT. So tangible change throughout COVID, it's joined up, it's operational. In terms of the valued lives, that's a lack of understanding. They're actually contracted to deliver support to people with and make any reasonable adjustments, including those people who have problems associated with their hearing. So I'd be interested to find out more about that. So if you could send me an email, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. The Mental Health Act and Mental Capacity Act, yes, that is an issue that we have been exploring in our operational group for the last 10 weeks. We have linked across to the new integrated MCA team across RCHT. They actually sit on our operational group as well. And I think, you know, if you were to see our very large tracker, we have considered most areas in terms of capacity. One area where we did have some concern is around TEPS and support for people with learning disability who might need resuscitating, and that's an ongoing piece of work which we've escalated up via our QAM, which is a new quality function. So I'd like to give you some assurance that that's in hand, and we have a plan and we have governance around that. Funding, yes. I don't have a clear line of sight to all of the financial plans spanning the next 3, 4, 5 years. However, what we do know is that at a national level, there is a commitment to enhance investment to support transformation across mental health services, and that's not just statutory mental health services. They make specific reference to complementary and voluntary sector support in that, and that's what we're doing in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly already. We are already investing in those areas to support the statutory offer, and that's wrapped up in our ability to meet the mental health investment standard expectation. So in terms of drawing in new money, yes, we're doing that as often as we can. So there is targeted investment to enhance things like bereavement support related to suicide prevention, and we're very good at putting those bids in, and we're pretty good at drawing the money down. So we're bringing in inward investment to assist with the programme of work as well, and we're working with the council on that. So I think we're trying to stay ahead of the curve on that, but notwithstanding the fact that we have a challenging situation locally in terms of our financial recovery, and we understand that. Your first point was around voluntary sector. So I've met with the chief executive of the VERA, and they are very much part of the work that we're doing, and they're assisting in our surge analysis, our surge mapping, to understand, and we've nearly finished a piece of work actually, around understanding what the offer currently is across the voluntary sector in terms of people's mental health and well-being. So mental well-being, what's keeping people well, what's preventing them becoming unwell, and there is a very clear offer to flex some of what they do to best support the work of the strategy, again, which is very good. What we're trying to now do is dovetail that with the work we're doing to map activity, to see whether we can maximise the benefit of the voluntary sector. So they're very much engaged in this work, and that's reported right up to a cell level as well. So we have good system oversight of that.
Thank you very much, Tim, for a very detailed response there to specific issues around current provision of services, but also thank you for again presenting the strategy that we should hear for governing body to endorse. Helen wants to come in, and then we've got John Garman with a final point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is a really important strategy. It takes us from focusing on the delivery of a mental illness service to really thinking about the development of a culture that thinks about good mental health and well-being. And I think the clinical leadership from the CCG, but not just from the CCG, from clinicians of every discipline, including social care, will be really, really important in demonstrating that it's good mental health and well-being we want to champion. So supporting people to supporting people who've suffered with mental health or mental illness, who have been unwell, to bring their voice to be heard, their lived experience to shape the way in which we respond to mental illness, and ensuring that we don't allow fragmentation to exist. I think we talk a lot about fragmentation, but we know that people who use substances and have mental illness in particular really struggle. We know that people who have a learning disability or autism really struggle when it comes to talking about mental health. But in reality, we have allowed that fragmentation to exist in the way in which we've enabled services to be designed and to act. And I think, therefore, our clinical leadership, our leadership in demonstrating that that's no longer how we want to think about these services is really, really important.
Could I comment there? Thank
Please,
you, Helen.
thanks.
I mean, Helen, thank you. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing senior provider leads across the system working together with a shared language now. And I've seen that happening over recent months, and I think that's really powerful. People talking about trusted assessments, so people don't have to tell their story 5, 8, 10 times, which I heard time and time again. So a trusted assessment, you take what people say and you listen to what people want and you try and deliver what they need and what they want at the same time. So it's starting, but we're going to look to everyone to help as well. It needs to be everyone's business.
Thank you. John, you wanted to make a point?
I'll keep it very brief because it sounds like Arthur needs a bit of attention. I was really just going to back up what Nikki was saying about sort of the harder to reach and particularly deaf community. So we've got a few deaf families in certainly on my patch, and actually attending to their mental health is really, really difficult. So the other day I had to have a 3-way video conversation between a sign language interpreter, a deaf family, and myself. And actually the nuances of trying to understand someone's mental health in that is just nigh on impossible. So, I mean, there needs to be I guess, particularly with what Nikki was saying earlier about face mask and various things, actually really, really hard to reach and needs to be well thought of in the strategy. But,
so some of the people that we might be seeing across our communities over coming months won't have your textbook presentations, which clinicians would understand and recognise. That this horrible term sub-threshold, they're going to be people that necessarily haven't got a post-traumatic stress disorder. They're anxious, they're stressed, they're worried, they're less familiar with their surroundings, they haven't seen their family for a while, and at times they'll question where they are in all of this. So we're going to have to be doing things slightly differently. So we're looking at that now. We're looking at how existing services can flex to do things differently, and how we might need to approach things differently. We're asking the people what it is that you want. So the surveys which have gone out, which we've influenced, are really asking people, if you need different things now, what is it that might benefit you, and how might we be able to provide that? Supporting people who are hard of hearing or deaf is really important. They have mental health needs too. So again, I'm interested to hear if there are any difficulties and challenges out there, because there are very clear expectations that I would have and what people should be receiving.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the governing body's asked to endorse the mental health strategy, acknowledging that that's the text that we've been presented with. Tim's going to share the infographics expected to go to Health and Wellbeing Board now, I think, which will be in January, but very much looking forward to how this now is implemented and further oversight through the Mental Health Board. So thank you very much, Tim, for all your work and your team's work on this, for what, again, as we started off with, 12 months plus piece of work, and it will continue into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Had a request to come in for Melissa to go first on committee updates, if that's all right. So Chris is very kindly moved around.
Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Arthur's having a little bit of a meltdown.
Not a problem.
He doesn't quite understand why I can't come right now. So obviously you've got the minutes from the last meeting, and we've got I believe our next primary care meeting next week. So everything is changing really on a daily basis, but kind of expanding on what Ian said in his report, the primary care networks the work is really quite extensive, and their positive leadership is helping to not just to transform patient care, but also to allow the PCNs to work together and integrate better. And Andrew could probably expand on that a little bit more. Obviously, the work that we were, before COVID hit, we were just transitioning into delegated commissioning. And so we were just strengthening our governance and decision-making processes around that, which is now continuing, that we're able to we're getting more business as usual. But we did receive substantial assurance from our last audit, which I hope you'll agree is fantastic, and well done to all of those involved in that piece. But also now it's about getting the actions that are outstanding devolved to the right committees and the right groups, as you well know, so that this works and leads up to the primary care commissioning committee. There are a couple of other points that have been happening, but I think the most key point is probably just to assure you that we're still working on Mevagizzi, and that there's ongoing support for them. I can see Nigel just come in there. Andrew, I don't know whether you just want to expand on what is happening there, because I think that's probably the point that most people might want to hear about.
Yeah, so I'll respond on that, and then I'll just add one other quick thing while I got the microphone. So members of the team with the quality and nursing team are meeting the partners at Mevagizzi this week to progress the assurance work. As I think I highlighted at the last meeting, it's very difficult to do the kind of the whites of the eyes, see the evidence and policies and protocols in practice when you can't actually be there in person. So there are still a number of kind of assurance points that we need to follow up on. The Primary Care Commissioning Committee will get an update on that work at its meeting next week. So I'll hold fire until the team have met with the partners at Mevagizzi and gone through that process and get an update to governing body in due course. One other quick thing just to mention in terms of strengthening the work of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, and it relates to the previous agenda items around governing body assurance framework, quality and performance, finance and performance, and those sorts of things. It's perhaps a blessing and a curse in a way that there aren't many national constitutional indicators that relate to general practice, and so when you look at key performance indicators that the board look at, there's not really a lot on there which talks around how general practice is performing and the work that's going on and the outcomes. So the blessing in that is that, you know, we don't have a lot of people tied up producing lots and lots of reports which may or may not measure what matters. The opportunity in that really is that we can design a series of indicators which make sense to us. So within Claire's team, we're working with Sarah Foster and Nikki Thomas to come up with a range of quality indicators which really give us a bit of a sense on how general practice feels. I'm very conscious that I don't want this to be perceived as kind of the hard side of performance management, but I do think there is a balance that we need to make sure that the range of services we commission have a range of performance indicators. So we'll be working with the LMC through our LMC negotiations committee to try and develop a series of things which give a bit of a more sort of sensitive look in terms of what's going on in primary care. And I would expect in due course the governing body can start to see some of the outcomes of that from primary care commissioning committee papers in the near future.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Melissa. And thank you, Melissa. If you need to get off, then off you go.
Is that okay? I'm so sorry.
Of course, it's absolutely fine. We'll catch up later. Chris.
I'll keep this short. I'm conscious of time. I assume everyone's read the report. The challenge I push back to other committee chairs now is, I think as audit committee, we're the only one that produces a sort of summary report for the year. And I just ask whether that sort of summary report at the end of each year might be appropriate for other committees as well. Just a thought. I'll leave that hanging and maybe something we can discuss with Trudy. I'll walk you through some of the highlights of the end of year report for the audit committee. You've got a list of internal audit assurances and assessments. As Melissa said, primary care, one of the areas for review, went from reasonable to substantial. So very happy with that. You can see the evaluation of each of the areas that we looked at. And I can assure you that there's a gradual year-on-year improvement in evaluation grades, which is really positive as our staff continue to strive for continuous improvement. You can see the areas next for review this year. Patient and public engagement. Sally and I have already been in contact about that, and that list will be reviewed throughout the years and throughout the year in the various quarters, noting that with COVID we may stack up towards the back of the year, and we're asking TIA, who provide our internal audit assurance, how they plan to cope with that perhaps early delay in Q1 and Q2. But we're looking to try and mitigate that now rather than leave it all into Q4. I direct people's attentions to the head of internal audit's opinion, and basically they're satisfied from the areas that they reviewed that we have a reasonable and effective risk management, control and governance process in place. So, you know, that's to give members assurance that we have internal audit, but a sort of critical friend assurance that we're on the right track. The annual report and accounts, I'm not going to go into that in any detail. That's a detailed discussion for part 2. We've certainly got Steve Johnson from Grant Thornton, who are external auditors, who will be present at that meeting to give you an early readout. And I think you've had sight of the summary report. It's not the final report, but it will be discussed later. And then finally, the last bit is that we do a lot of counter-fraud activity, and you will see various periodic announcements on the staff bulletin and elsewhere on our counter-fraud services and what we're doing to try and prevent fraud. And just to give members assurance from a counter-fraud point of view that no frauds were subject to investigation that met the materiality aspect in respect of our external auditors. So there's no significant system failures or controls in weakness that were identified or would impact upon our annual governance statement. So it really is just to give members, if you've read the report, it's a riveting read clearly, just that assurance that we've got some external views and opinions of how we're doing our business, in addition to our internal checks and balances, which is obviously the statutory committees, the audit committee, EMT, the AO, the chair, and the governing body. So it's just to give you that warm feeling that whilst we're not complacent, we're keeping on track and we're doing reasonably well at the moment. Could always do better. Very happy to take any questions. The review and approval of the annual report and accounts is later, part 2.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I can't see any questions coming in, so we'll move. Should we move on to questions then from non-governing body members related to items on the agenda? And what I'll do, I've got the participant list in front of me, so I can't see crosses anymore. I'll go through in reverse order. So Richard Whitehouse, have you anything you would like to ask of governing body?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and say you're very welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Just going back up through the list. So Nigel, I know you put a cross in the box.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to leave the camera off because I appear to be lying down, which is so I can assure you. Just really to endorse Sally's comment about the importance of public engagement in the recovery aspect that she made at the beginning. She didn't mention, I don't think that she coordinated a quite detailed survey on behalf of CAP of individuals and got some really interesting responses about aspects like hearing loss. One of the other aspects that she got a response on, or various responses on, was dentistry. This is where Claire may prefer to switch off. I think the messaging is very confused. I got a message yesterday from my own dentist saying that the Chief Dental Officer for England has announced that dentists will reopen on the 8th of June, and saying they couldn't get hold of any PPE, so they weren't going to, because they weren't a priority, and they'd let us know when anything changed. So the message coming from the centre is rather at variance with what's happened locally. So I don't know if anybody can comment on that. Thank you.
Perhaps the first point to make is we don't commission dental services, but I think certainly around provision of PPE, and if that's an actual blocker, then whether Andrew, you've popped up there. Have you got an answer or a response to how we can support our dental practices on the planned reopening?
Not quite, but it's one step removed from that. I've got a call with my NHS England Oppo, who is responsible for commissioning dental services across the region. and it's a book call in advance of the national reopening of kind of routine dental work. So I just wanted to get from her an understanding of, yes, this is national policy. What does that mean locally? What insight do we have locally around dental access, knowing that it's an issue that's flagged up from a number of areas? So I will report back from that. But if anyone's got any questions they would like me to ask on their behalf, drop me an email, but I'll pick that one up, Nigel, for you.
Thank you.
And I think the point you were making there, and Sally made earlier on in the meeting, was how do we triangulate that information really, and look as wide and as far as possible to gather opinion to influence. Thank you. So going back to the list. So we've got for non-governing body members, got Louise Moore on the call. Did you want to say anything?
No, thank you. Thank
you. Heather Langley?
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you very much. Joan Heaton, she may well have left.
No, I have come back. Thank you.
You've come pop back on, have you? So you've been going in and out all the way through the meeting. I've been keeping my eye on it.
I apologise, it's me.
Not a problem.
I've got personal stories about bereavement and people going down to Derriford, coming home with no backup at all. I have a personal, I'm helping somebody at the moment, but without me, she would have had nobody. Her husband died in Derriford. So those things are quite distressing for people at the moment. They're not getting the backup that they need. And it's cancer patients going in and not having the treatment, and then it's too late, and then there's a bereavement, and it's quite distressing. So there's quite a few stories like that coming through.
Thank you, and I think to say that collecting all of that, really that lived experience and the impact of I say very different times, I think will be really important, and I think time for reflection and response to that will be really important as we look to a future that will never ever quite be the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just back up, have I done everybody there? I think that's everybody, unless anyone wants to jump in. I think I've asked everybody there. Sally, you sit on the governing body. You're having 2 bites at the cherry. Go on. You're on mute.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, member of the public as well. Just to say that at the very beginning of the meeting, something went wrong on chairs. Can I just clarify? The new system communications lead position, is that going to be from internal or is it an external appointment?
Helen may have a response to that.
We're going out to external adverts, Sally.
Oh right, okay, fine. Thank you very much, Sam, because I didn't know and it wasn't clear in the details. And just to say, yeah, thank you to everybody. Right, all the hard work, etc., all very much appreciated, and the mental health strategy, fantastic, excellent.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you all. I think we're due to meet again for part 2 for governing body members at 1 o'clock. That gives everyone time to go and stretch their legs, bit of fresh air, a cup of tea and maybe some lunch. So we'll be back online at 1 o'clock. Thank you everyone for the contribution, and see you later.
Thank you.